Hello everyone, and welcome to this panel, Navigating Troubled Waters. We'll look at the state of freshwater and the marine environment and the implications for people, planet, and the economy. I'm Annabelle Nelson, the lead at CoLab's Global Sustainability Practice, and I spent my career in finance, focusing on capital optimization in global life insurers and investment firms. And this is what's driven me to focus on sustainability. And recently, I've become increasingly concerned that financial institutions' work on climate is centered on carbon emissions, the cause of climate change, and yet the impacts are felt largely through changes in the water cycle. So where, when, and how much rain falls. And last year, I wrote Navigating Troubled Waters, which examines how the financial sector is exposed to systemic-related risks. And these are climate-related, but are largely unmanaged. So not only did the paper provide the inspiration for this panel event, and thanks very much, Reset Connect, but it also gives some practical guidance for boards to better manage these risks. But we live on a blue planet. 90% and 97% of the water on it is salt water. And we know that oceans are critical for regulating our climate. Marine ecosystems support biodiversity, protect against coastal erosion, and underpin lives and livelihoods. But less than 1% of oceans are well managed. And the surge in temperatures means that we're close to an ecological and physical limits. Our global economy depends on freshwater as well, for agriculture, of course, but also for energy, industry, technology. Sorry. So our global economy depends on freshwater, but for agriculture, energy, industry, technology, and transport, as well as for consumption and sanitation. But at the current rate of consumption, there'll be a 40% shortfall in freshwater supply by 2030. So this is an immediate problem. This is not a future problem. And it's a foreseeable material systemic financial risk for financing investors. So the question is what to do about it. And to help answer that, I'm joined by a distinguished panel. So starting from my left, I've got Mark Parry, who is Head of Ocean Habitat Restoration at the Ocean Conservation Trust. Paul Eakins is Professor of Resources and Environment Policy at University College London. Ulf Leonard is founder of Watervent. And Andre Ranchin is an investment consultant and the biodiversity lead at Hymans Robertson. So, we'll hopefully take questions from the audience at the end of this session. But first, can I ask each of you briefly to introduce yourself, your organisation, and what you're working on? So, Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, Annabelle, and thanks very much for having me along this afternoon. So my name's Mark Parry. I'm the Head of Ocean Habitat Restoration for the Ocean Conservation Trust. We're a Southwest-based charity, and we have a focus on protecting and restoring coastal habitats. And yeah.
Brilliant. Ulf, can I go to you?
Yeah, my name is Ulf Leonhard, based out in Berlin. Who of you was already in Berlin? I'm a bit disappointed. Well, I founded Watervent 15 years ago, and we match water tech innovators with investors and potential clients.
Brilliant. Andre?
Hi, so I'm Andre Ranchin, biodiversity at Hymans Robertson, which is an actuarial and investment consultancy here in the UK. And we're really helping our clients, who are large asset owners such as pension funds, tackle nature and climate issues, including water.
Brilliant. And lastly, Paul.
Yes, thanks, Annabelle. So as Annabelle said, I'm Paul Eakins. I'm Professor of Resources and Environmental Policy at University College London. And I'm here because we're doing a project for the Office of National Statistics under its Economic Statistics Centre of Excellence programme, and we're creating water accounts for England and Wales.
Brilliant. So Andre, if I can start with you. it's increasingly recognised that asset owners, such as pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, have a really important role to play or in water management because they are stewards of long-term investment. What areas are your clients asking for help in respect of water, and why? Is it all about managing risk, or are there opportunities?
Yeah, thank you, Annabelle. So first of all, I think there is a growing awareness from our clients of the importance of water in a number of areas. So maybe to set the scene a little bit, if I can ask everyone to imagine for a second that we're leaving London, shooting up in a spaceship towards space, hurtling away. You can keep the headsets, they look like they belong in space. And then go and now turn back as we leave the atmosphere and look at our planet. It's a blue planet. Water really dominates and is essential for life on Earth. So 70% of the surface is water, over 70%. The oceans capture around 30% of human greenhouse gas emissions and 90% of the excess heat from those emissions, and produces around 50% of global oxygen. So every other breath you take comes in some way from the ocean. For our clients, I think really recognizing this and sort of understanding this is step one. SDG 14, life underwater, is still the least well-funded of all the UN Sustainable Development Goals, despite the fact that it's essential for all the other UN SDGs. So really helping our clients understand these risks is the first step. And these risks are multifaceted. So looking just at oceans, for instance, some of the key pressures such as pollution, overexploitation and overfishing, and climate change really are pivotal. So just a couple of very brief examples. So in terms of pollution, there are more synthetic microfibers in our waterways than stars in the Milky Way galaxy, which is mind-boggling. And looking at overfishing, I think few people realize the scale of overfishing and the financial risks. So about 40% of everything we catch is thrown back into the ocean, dead or dying. This is called bycatch, and this is just staggering. If this were to happen on land, it would be mind-boggling. So and I guess freshwater as well, some really important topics that we'll hear about around flooding, droughts, and again, water quality and pollution. So these are material financial issues, and our clients are really starting to kind of come to grasp with them, and also think about how to take action. So there may be 3 actions that we're helping our clients with. The first one is setting policies and trying to understand what actions they can take, what tangible actions they can take in terms of their investment objectives. The second one is around stewardship and engagement. So making sure that these topics, and water in particular as a risk, is on the agenda for conversations with asset managers and portfolio companies. And then finally, some of the innovations and technology that's available is really starting to grow very quickly, and we'll hear about some of that today, I think.
Brilliant, thanks very much. So Mark, we've heard from Andre that the marine environment is critically important in managing the climate and biodiversity. Tell us about the work that the Ocean Conservation Trust have been leading.
Yes, thanks, Annabelle. So the Ocean Conservation Trust has been working on coastal habitats for the past 10 years, and they're in rapid decline. Hello, is that better? So our habitats around our coast are in rapid decline, even though there is an MPA network established for the protection of these habitats. It's been in place for the last 25 years, and many of those habitats are falling into unfavourable condition. So as an NGO, we've taken it upon ourselves to work with partners, sponsors, and at times government to try and reverse that decline for the sake of biodiversity. We've also worked with on EU-funded projects that have been led by Natural England with a specific focus on seagrasses. So seagrasses are one of the most biodiverse marine habitats that we have around the UK. And even though they are protected, they are still in decline. They serve many ecosystem services and some of the services that you mentioned previously with regards to carbon sequestration. We have lots of conversations about the ability for coastal habitats to turn reasonably low sort of valued areas of our coastline into high value areas with regards to carbon, nitrogen cycling, biodiversity. So as an NGO, we've been working to understand the the life cycle requirements and the mechanism to recover these vital habitats.
That's great. But as a conservationist, why are you here in a room full of financiers and investors?
That is an interesting question. So, as I say, we've primarily taken this upon ourselves as a non-profit because these goods or these habitats are there as for public good, and many of these habitats have declined not from economic activities, and nobody is really taking responsibility for the reversal of these. So to try to reverse this degradation, we've launched a fund, Ocean Fund, that allows investment in the recovery of these ecosystem services. That's a tokenized offer. It's unique in the marine environment because it's never been done before. And subsequently, what we do is subdivide the area of effort into smaller opportunities for people to invest, and then we provide a token or a certificate that allows the sponsor to evidence the positive impact that they're having on the recovery of nature.
Brilliant. And is it right that you're looking for, in the tokenization, you're looking to make that a sort of new asset class for investors to invest in?
Yes, so I think the development of full carbon credits and biodiversity net gain credits in the marine environment is an incredibly complicated thing, and in the terrestrial environment it doesn't necessarily transpose directly over. Nature for us cannot wait, that degradation can't wait, so whilst we are contributing towards the development of these official sort of financial mechanisms, we've launched this nature fund that allows investors to evidence their positive impact and make a real difference immediately.
That's great. So, Paul, I mean, Mark has talked about the ecosystem services of the marine environment, seagrass beds, etc. What's driving the work that you're doing on freshwater to create regional freshwater accounts? And could you give a little bit more detail on what you mean by putting freshwater data on the same footing as financial data?
Yeah, thanks, Annabelle. Well, we're all aware that every month the Office for National Statistics comes out with key economic statistics, GDP, the amount we produce, employment, those sorts of things. But for the environment, we largely have a black hole of information of that kind. So we don't really know how much water we have, how much water we use, who uses it, how has that changed over time, how much is it worth, in other words, what sort of economic activity does it support. We all know that we all depend fundamentally on fresh water, but those sort of systematic organization of data, which is what accounting is all about, is something that is still very largely lacking. And we read about in our newspapers practically every day the problems that the water systems are experiencing. 2 articles in The Guardian yesterday about over-extraction from rivers, lakes and streams. Practically daily we get articles about sewage, the quantity of sewage that is in the water system. The fact that until a year or so ago we weren't even measuring the sewage outflows in anything like a systematic way means that for one of the most important facts of human existence, we're flying blind, more or less. And then we have the really problematic issue that this is all due, these problems are due to get much worse with climate change, and we have to plan for that, but you can't possibly plan for something where you don't even know where you are and you're not starting. So that was the rationale for this project, to produce these water accounts, and I think we're making reasonable progress. What did we discover? Well, firstly, we discovered there was lots and lots of data, but it's all held by different people, and different organizations. It's collected in different ways. It's not organized systematically, and it's not up to date. For example, the latest water quantity statistics date from 2018. Now, quite a lot has happened since 2018, not least in the water environment. I think the final thing I'll say this round is that in addition to water needs for people, there are acute water needs for the environment. And we will simply not know how much water we need to leave in order to maintain biodiversity, in order to maintain various environmental features, if we haven't got a handle on how much we're using, what we're using it for, and how much we're going to want to use in the future.
Yes, it's very salutary. Given pretty much every economic activity requires fresh water, we are over-abstracting water. Ulf, the need for efficient, sustainable water management is really evident. What appetite are you seeing for finance of innovation and investing?
Well, first of all, a question to you. Who of you dares to drink water from the tap? Wow. So you are not living in UK? No. I'm exaggerating. I came to the point in 2010 where I detected that water tech innovations are still somehow neglected, abandoned, and it's still the case. I have giving you some figures, I have some 8,500 water tech startups on my mailing list. So, and this is including global reach like US, California, Israel, and as well UK, even from Germany, one of the minor stressed companies, regions, there are coming a lot of innovators. And I slept too less last night, I have to excuse. This is the relevance of economy, as I'm seeing, 8,000 startups, and the funding was in total about 350 million euros in the startup area. And one of the most active regions, is go without saying, is California and Israel. Being strong after it's Scandinavia and UK. So there's still hope, but still, like there are only 12 water-related, water stress-related VC funds in this world who do only water. So and the rest of remaining stems from anywhere sources of business, etc. So the sector is still neglected. And this was one of the reasons I set up WaterVent in 2010 in order to match water tech innovators with investors and clients, where I have to point out that's one of the most crucial points which is lacking is the acceptance of new water technologies for potential users like utilities. I'm coming later up to this point. It's in order to create a reference application, reference clients for these water tech innovators beyond funding. And this is a difficulty in this extremely conservative sector.
Okay, but you thought that the rationale for more efficient water usage, if there's uncertainty of supply and water has a cost, you thought that the demand for more efficient technology and the opportunities from investing in it would be a bit of a no-brainer. So why isn't it happening at scale? And what do you think are the key challenges? What are the key challenges that you're seeing, Ulf, in preventing this?
One of the most evident challenges is the minor acceptance of water tech innovations with utilities, those who are in charge to distribute the water. And secondly is that water is simply too cheap. Water is not of value, so everybody has it. It's a common good which is available normally. Ask those people who do not have any infrastructure. Some about 60% of people, of the population of this world has to go on foot in barrels or in cans to get the water from wells. So the reason is, this is not evident in us, it's not the suffering, it's still too low. So it's a common good. And I may quote the UN right for water, which is purely theoretical because the majority of Latin American countries or African countries or even in Asia, the degree of water ignorance is pretty well established. So within the governments, because simply done nothing, except Singapore, who is one of the very nice exceptions in this landscape. But nevertheless, the water topic, the water stress is not really present in us. And it's going to be felt. Even in Germany, we have had some drought experiences last year where the water supply had to be secured with tanks. Imagine in Germany, yeah? And we have a perfect infrastructure. So people were forbidden to get water from ponds and surface water sources. So the situation is coming up more and more. And this is one of the reasons where water tech investments become more and more viable in the sector. So I see and I get more and more inquiries from corporates who are in need of water, who are prepared to support water tech startups by investing or simply trying out water tech innovations in their facilities.
Okay, so here's a stat for you. The UK, our famously green and pleasant land, is a net importer of water. And we import water from some of the most water-stressed countries on Earth. And our economy depends upon water for everything. So another example, you may recall that in 2021, when we're all coming out of COVID, you couldn't buy a new car. That was an example of climate-related financial risk being realized because we had a demand shock. We're all wanting new connectivity at the same time as we had a supply shock, the availability of semiconductors. So you couldn't buy a new car because there was not an insufficient supply of chips. And those chips are made majoritively made in Taiwan. And the fabrication of semiconductors is hugely water intensive. And you had a demand shock at the same time as a supply shock. Taiwan went through one of the longest and most severe droughts that you'd ever had. Reservoir levels were down to 7%. So the Taiwanese government was prioritizing the availability of water to the fabrication plants, and other industries were told to down tools. That shortfall of supply to the automotive industry impacted production of cars globally, and it's hundreds of billions of dollars impact. So that gives you an example, just one sector, one application. But the cost of chips went up, and it caused inflationary pressures across the whole economy. So from a financial perspective, it is real, and as investors, we need to take account of it. So, Andre, we've heard the opportunities around, for the rationale for more efficient water usage and the need for more investment in efficiency. Are you seeing investors actually directing capital at scale into investments which are addressing the freshwater crisis and also improving the resilience of our oceans? And if not, what are the blockers and why isn't it happening?
So I think the short answer, sadly, is no. We are not seeing investment at scale from the likes of large institutional asset owners in water, challenges, be it freshwater or saltwater. What are the blockers? There are a number of them. One of which is data. We heard some of the challenges around data, and certainly if you compare with another key, environmental biodiversity-related theme, which is deforestation, the amount of data available in that space, which is still imperfect, is far more granular, far more thorough data than for water, for the likes of pollution in water or overfishing, for instance. Another key area, I think, is if you think about perhaps the trustee of a pension scheme or another key decision maker, there are many different environmental issues to tackle. There's a multiplicity of these different sustainability issues, and also lack of understanding of the issues themselves and of how they're interrelated. So there perhaps isn't a recognition of the importance of water and how it underpins issues related to climate, issues related to biodiversity. Another key point, ironically, is the scalability. And this seems very surprising given the size of oceans, but at the moment we're not necessarily seeing the scale and opportunities at scale for investors to be able to deploy capital at the scale that they need to. A lot of innovation and a lot of great work being done, but we're perhaps not there yet in that regard, which is related to another point, which is around timescales and time horizons. I guess key decision time horizons for companies and for politicians are very short, maybe 1 to 3 years. For institutional asset owners, maybe you're speaking in decades, but some of the impacts that we're having here are likely to be very material and irreversible. The health of our oceans could affect life on Earth for thousands of years, but the decisions being made in terms of risk and return are not necessarily matching the timescales of the risks that we're exhibiting. So all of these things, I think, are really key challenges. Perhaps to finish with a more positive note, we are seeing things shift. I think policy, certainly a lot of momentum with things like the biodiversity COP conferences and the High Seas Treaty that was discussed at the UN conference. And we are seeing more and more investment strategies related to water. So I think there's cause for hope, but still far from where we need to be.
Yes, no, I agree. I think you made some really key points there around time horizons. And as an accountant, one of the observations I would make is the problem with water and with many other sustainability externalities is they're not actually reflected in financial metrics and financial accounting. And financial accounting itself is inherently backward-looking, if you like, whereas sustainability is forward-looking and it is incredibly complex. And there's a high degree of subjectivity as to what to prioritize. Environmental, water, nature, social issues. And it's not a zero-sum game. So it's incredibly complex for asset owners and investors to decide what's the most important thing to prioritize and then get the data to prove that it's the work, the activities that we're undertaking achieving the intended output. So perhaps that would be a good time. Apologies.
Something wrong with the transmission.
Apologies. Is that better?
In the headsets.
Well, perhaps now would be a good... Can you hear me?
No.
It's not much better.
Hello, technicals. Something wrong.
The signal seems to be deteriorating.
Yeah, signal does not work.
How much? Hello.
Okay. If this is intolerable, please shout. Perhaps, Paul, this would be a good time to move to put you on the spot. I appreciate your work is at an early stage, but I'm going to put you on the spot anyway. And ask, what do you anticipate will be...
Hello. Can't hear a thing.
Hello, genius at the front. What's going on?
Hello, can you hear me?
No, hello.
Can you hear me on this one? No? Hello, can you hear me on this one?
Hey.
Yeah? Thumbs up? Can you hear me? So you can hear me? Okay, great. The wonders of technology. So Paul, perhaps now I'm afraid I've completely lost my train of thought.
You're going to put me on the spot.
Oh yes. I was going to put you on the spot. Right, spot is coming. There it is. What do you anticipate? I mean, your work's at an early stage. I appreciate that in creating freshwater accounts. But what do you anticipate will be the biggest challenges in creating effective freshwater accounting so that we start to manage water using a truly economic value so that we really value water, it's not treated as a free good?
I think there are three fundamental issues that we need to address. The first is that we have to get much better at measurement. In this country, uniquely in Europe, we do not have to measure how much water we use in our homes. It's a voluntary decision as to whether we have a water meter, and about half the population has no clue how much water they're using because they don't have a water meter. They pay on an average basis to their water company. That is obviously economic and common sense nonsense when we're talking about a scarce good. The second thing is that we have to be much better at measuring and monitoring the water environment. This is not rocket science. It's not difficult to monitor how much sewage comes out of combined sewer overflows. You simply have to put the measuring device on there and make sure that it works. And frankly, it's an unutterable scandal that we only started doing that for all the combined sewer overflows in this country 18 months ago. This is something that could be automated relatively easily. So we hear a lot about AI and all that kind of stuff. I mean, this is fairly basic automation of the amount that's used. Industry already has to record how much it's using. And of course, industry has become much more efficient at using water because it has to measure it and pay for it on the basis of the amount that it uses. And then the third fundament, which is nothing to do with accounting, but is basically to do with politics, is we have to sort out the water industry, which has been allowed for much too long to dictate the terms of its operations and use money for purposes that it was not agreed to be used. And I'm glad to say the present government seems to have a bit of a handle on that. Whether they make the right reforms as fast as they need to be made will, I think, remain to be seen.
Okay, that's a pretty salutary set of lists. So perhaps now I can open up to the audience for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? Gentlemen, do we have a roving mic? Gentleman just here. If you can give your name, where you're from, and then who your question is directed to.
I'm Professor Chris Imafidon. I'm the chairman of the Excellence in Education program. We work with schools and with the industry in terms of building the next generation of eco-warriors, if you want to put it that way. I wanted to find out from the audience, literally, what changed between the government of Boris Johnson giving 80% to any green entrepreneur to establish any industry that recruits people into either solar or green, and the current government that honestly believe is now drill baby drill, essentially. What made the fundamental change between an eco-friendly?
So if I paraphrase that question and make sure I've understood it correctly, what the gentleman is asking is what's changed in the political attitude and appetite to support environmental initiatives. Now, I want to caveat, I don't think you have any policy experts, governmental policy experts on the panel, but I'm sure we all have views. But perhaps, who would like to take a first?
I'll take that one just very simply. I think what the fundamental change is rather than a drive from government to support sustainability initiatives, I think the public look at government and government look at industry, and industry look at partners. And I think that's what the fundamental change is rather than it being a centrally funded activity, they're looking to business to develop and fund these types of initiatives. So there's an opportunity there for business to be able to grow and contribute that.
I would add another point, which is as the role of the financial markets, and speaking as one of the members on the panel who is truly integrated into finance. The role of the financial markets is the efficient allocation of capital. It's not our role to decide what makes something most efficient. That's the role of policy and regulation. However, as long-term investors, and so both Andre and I operate in that field, we have to keep an eye on material risks that will impact the financial return on our investments. So we are we've talked about the challenges of valuing these sustainability externalities, which are real and will affect financial returns, but aren't yet reflected in prices. That's one of the reasons why Professor Paul's work is underway. But we live under a budget constraint. We're not awash with surplus cash as an economy to finance things, so we have to be innovative. And I think where we are seeing a slight rollback in policy and in some cases in regulation, what we are seeing is an uptick in litigation, because these harms aren't going away. And so you're seeing a rise in strategic litigation to focus attention. And one of the reasons why I wrote my paper was water stress, freshwater stress is where I focused on. It is a material risk to the whole economy. So it may not be material at an individual loan, investment, underwriting contract level, but at a financial institutions level, it is material because it aggregates across the whole balance sheet. So there is an incentive for financial institutions to address this in terms of long-run investment returns, but there's also a growing responsibility within boards to address these material financial risks. Does anybody else?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, because policy is actually the thing that I mainly focus on across the piece. The big difference between when Boris Johnson was elected in 2019 and where we are now is COVID. So when Boris Johnson came to power, the public sector was not exactly rich, but it didn't have a public sector debt of nearly 100% of GDP, which meant that the ability to borrow further funds is very, very limited. That means, as Mark said, that if we're going to get improvements, they're going to have to be funded by either the private commercial sector or by consumers. And that's what we're seeing very much now in the water environment. We'll all be aware that our water bills have gone up by between 20 and 50% over this year. They will be going up again, so that the water companies are able to make the investments that they need to make in order to ensure that we get the water quantity and quality that we all expect. It's going to be absolutely vital to ensure that when the water companies get that money, they do actually spend it on the infrastructure that we need. And that's been one of the problems in the past, that has not happened to the extent that it should have happened. But that enormous overhang of public debt is easily the single biggest change of condition over the last 5 years as far as UK public policy is concerned.
Okay. Are there additional questions? The lady in the front here.
Hi, my name is Olivia Rendon. I'm at the Plymouth Marine Laboratory in the southwest. It's great to see Mark Parry here and hear about your initiative, and also just great to have a session on water. Maybe next year we can have a marine one and a freshwater separately. I'm just wanted to ask Mark, it's great to hear about the initiative that the Ocean Conservation Trust is doing. I wanted to know how much of a dent will it actually have in restoration of blue ecosystems in the UK? And also maybe asking also Andre, what do you think, what finance instruments or type of investments will be the way to go forward into the future, maybe for the UK, or if you want to talk for Europe or generally? My interest is blue ecosystems, but just wanted to know what are the instruments that are looking like promising into the future.
Thank you, Olivia. Thanks for the question. So what dent will our initiative have and the work that we do? We have to work in natural cycles, so we have to work with the plant availability and the natural habitat that we have. So currently we can operate at a sort of 10 hectare scale, and in some contexts that's a reasonably large area, but when you look at the ambitions of the statutory advisor for conservation's goal of 38,000 hectares of restored coastal habitats, then it's a tiny dent. What we are doing and what initiatives in this space are doing. There is no manual for this currently. And we're building the skill set amongst young professionals. We're understanding life cycle requirements, but also working on sort of research and development to be able to do this at scale. I think one of the bottlenecks for us is the availability of material. I think if we can overcome that with technology and plant science innovation, then with the skill set there and the sort of the understanding of the logistics and the process of recovering these habitats, then that unlocks the potential for the tens of thousands of hectares. So it's a worthwhile contribution that we're making at the moment, and we are effectively understanding how we put a manual together of how we do it for when we're ready to be able to do it at scale.
And then taking the investment solutions question, which is a very good one. The way I see it, there are perhaps two main areas where you can, as an investor, contribute positively in terms of allocating capital. One is through innovation, so things like technology that will support marine and freshwater. And some of that will be quite nascent technology. So you might have, for instance, private equity or private debt strategies that support this innovation directly and indirectly in a number of ways. And then the other key area is direct ocean restoration. And now that I think naturally is a little bit more challenging, because there's always going to be a form of trade-off between return and positive impact on the oceans. One of the things we've seen is the development and prevalence of blue bonds, for instance. Not saying they're a silver bullet, but there's certainly an interesting and innovative approach to trying to help both have a good risk-adjusted return for investors, whilst also supporting ocean preservation indirectly, of course. One interesting point I'd note with these is that there's almost a paradigm shift in the way that they're structured from an investment perspective, in that it's a much more collaborative approach than a traditional fund, where you would perhaps go to an asset manager and they would take a number of different companies, package them as an equity fund, and take that to investors. You need a far more parties around the table. You need organizations who are experts in conservation. You need development banks, insurance, asset managers, asset owners, and governments often getting involved. So promising area, but it's certainly relatively early days. But thank you for the question.
Are there any other questions? The lady at the front, just here.
Hi, my name is Mary Hunter Hieronymus. I work for Just Impact.
You work for who, sorry?
Just Impact.
Can't hear you.
You can't hear me.
Hold
Hold it closer?
That's better.
Is that better? Okay, sorry. My name is Mary Hunter Hieronymus. I work for Just Impact. We provide data and analytics to the financial community, tracking nature, climate, and social risks and true impacts. It occurred to me listening to this panel that not only do we have asset owners looking at a myriad of priorities across all of those themes, but you also have the challenge of priorities within water. Which leads me back to my question, which is about the data challenge. So we provide data to asset owners who are starting to look at water stress, as an example. How are you tackling that to start solving these problems and maybe choosing some of the ones with the biggest impacts? Suppose this question could go to Andre or maybe Paul. Thank you.
Well, why don't I start that? Thanks very much. That's a really important question. The UN system of national accounts, which is what financial analysts will look at when they're thinking about investments in companies. Companies have to report their data in a certain kind of format, and all that data is then collated into the system of national accounts by sector. So the UK national accounts are about 120 different sectors and then broken down even further. That's an enormous statistical undertaking, which means that the people who need that information, the financial analysts, the corporate accountants, are able to go to a well-established statistical system. For the environment, the UN has created the system of environmental economic accounting, but that only became remotely operational in 2014, and most recently for the ecosystem accounts in 2021. In other words, we're at a very, very early stage of creating anything like the same data framework that we have for the economy as we have for the environment, even though the environment is much more important than the economy, because the economy can't function without it in any meaningful way. So the challenge is enormous. The good news is that actually it's not that expensive to create a proper system of environmental economic accounting and relating the various environmental issues to the economic activities which they support. But at the moment, governments are not finding the necessary resources to create that system of environmental economic accounts in anything like the kind of detail that we will need if people like you are to make proper judgments about the sort of material risks from climate, from freshwater use, from biodiversity loss that are coming down the track. So there is some urgency to get on with this. We now know how to do it, but it does require some resources, and at the moment those resources are not being provided in the quantity that is required.
And from an asset owner perspective, I think there's a different level of challenge, as you know, because of course asset owners will be directly relying on the data from companies and from government and to be able to understand their risks and mitigate them. In terms of approach, I suppose we follow the task force on nature-related climate financial disclosures, the TNFD, and how they think about these things. And that includes, for instance, looking at some of the key threats to biodiversity and some of the drivers of biodiversity loss. Water is one of the key issues within that. But then some of the data availability around, I suppose, water, there probably is quite a lot in terms of company data on water, but it isn't necessarily the type of data that you need to make investment decisions. And then the data on marine risks and key threats to the ocean is still lacking in many areas.
So I think I'd add to that. I think there are two, from my perspective and my observations working with asset owners and asset managers, I say there are two key challenges which can very simply be categorized as a capability challenge. You don't know what you don't know. And it's really understanding the interconnectivity of water with climate, with biodiversity, environmental resilience, and the social impacts. And that's just really not well understood. In most instances, we're financiers, we're not ecologists, we're not sociologists. But also there's a capacity element, which is there are maybe lots of data, but do you have the means, capability to understand it, and then to harvest it and deploy it? Because a lot of that data may not be timely, it may not be relevant, it may not be comparable. And as allocators of capital, we have a fiduciary duty to act in our members' best interests, whether it's as an asset manager, we have a fiduciary duty to meet the requirements of our asset owner clients as set out in the mandates, and as asset owners to our members. And we have to deliver financial return, but as we've talked about, the impacts aren't necessarily quantified because these ecosystem services are still treated as free goods. They're not necessarily reflected in the financial price. And you also have a time horizon element because the impacts will be over a long period of time, but you might be measuring financial performance over a 3-year benchmark maybe. So it's a very good question you ask, and the answering that question is incredibly complex. But I think I've observed in the last 2 years, the level of progress that's being made across the industry has been phenomenal. So in the interests of time, I would like to ask each of our panel members, this has been a really interesting discussion. We've touched on a lot of themes. I'd like you each to kind of summarize and give kind of one key takeaway that you'd like to leave the audience with, and ideally an action for them to go and take away and implement. So maybe if I can start with you, Mark, and we'll just follow along the panel.
Okay. I think in summary that there are NGOs out there, and I represent one of them, that are trying to reverse the damage that's been done to the environment, not by ourselves but by economic activity, and there's no owner to that. We are trying to recover that for public good, and we spend a lot of time and effort trying to find financial support for that. We have invested or developed sort of voluntary tokens that people can invest to support this work, and as one of the questions raised, how close are we to getting to a point of scale, and just starting with these small incremental steps, or these reasonably large incremental steps, it moves us towards a position that we can actually have some very wide, broad-ranging impact. So please invest in the restoration of nature. I think that would be the takeaway point.
Paul?
Yeah, so I think if I'm allowed two, I mean, the first one is those of you who have not got a water meter, get one and get aware of how much water you use and think about how you can reduce that, because we still are using more water per person in this country than most European countries, so there's an enormous scope there. And secondly, join an organization like Mark's. There's any number of NGOs doing fantastic work. The fact that we know that our rivers are polluted by sewage is quite simply because of people like you, who went out there and started doing some citizen science and measuring it, and were then appalled by what you found. And the politicians have had to take such notice that this is now the number one priority of our Secretary of State for the Environment, and why we've seen some laws coming forward from that. So get stuck in and say that the current state of things is completely unacceptable.
Ulf?
Yes, first of all, thank the audience to be with us here. I'm really amazed how many people are interested in this exotic topic when I'm comparing it to the energy panels. And let me resume. For instance, for the data problem, there are enough startups who do data collection in the water space, by the way. Let me resume with my two favorite sayings. The first is, you cannot suck water from the internet. Surprise, surprise. You need it physically. The second is, energy can be quite easily produced, but water can't. And this is the very truth. So you need it haptical, physically on your side, unless you are running into troubles. And there are thousands of startups who count on this and reducing your trouble and, well, do anticipative jobs on that. And it's always a question of will and motivation of local authorities to put into validation this amount of startups. So my wish is that water tech innovators are finally taken into serious, please.
And finally, Andre.
Yeah, so I guess thinking more from an investor and finance perspective, I think my one action to take away would be to have this theme in your policy. So if you have an environmental policy, to make sure that you have water and oceans prevalent in there, and also recognizing the relationship of that theme with biodiversity and climate, and how important it is as step one for action.
I totally second that, Andre. Start asking. As investors, we're all very aware of the climate impact, the carbon impact of our investments, but we also need to look at the wider environmental impacts. So ask your pension providers, asset owners, put it into your mandate, because if you ask, it will happen. It will then become normalized, and then it will become mainstream. So with that, I'd like to really thank, and I'm sure the audience will join me in thanking the panel. It's been a great discussion. Mark, Paul, Ulf, Andre, thank you so much. And please join me in a round of applause.